daily late-night jogs were a ritual, a slice of solace amidst the chaos of life. The streets of my town, usually bustling during the day, wore a cloak of serene calm after dusk. But that serenity was shattered one evening by something as mundane as a car. The first time it passed me, it was just another vehicle, an old, nondescript sedan, perhaps a bit more worn out than most. Its paint was chipped in places, and its windows were tinted a deep, impenetrable black. I didn't give it much thought. However, about 10 minutes later, the same car passed me again, moving at a snail's pace. This time, I felt a twinge of unease. It wasn't uncommon for cars to circle the block, but there was something about the deliberate slowness that put me on edge. Shaking off the anxiety, I continued jogging, but the car returned. This time, it drove even slower, almost crawling beside me in the dim streetlights. The reflection off its dark windows rendered the inside completely invisible. Who was driving? Were they watching me? With every pass of the car, it seemed to grow more intimidating, the engine's growl more pronounced. My heartbeat began to race in tandem with my steps. A familiar streets now felt like a maze, and I was being hunted. I decided to confront my fears. The next time the car approached, I stopped, trying to peer through the tinted windows. "Hey, is there a problem?" I shouted, my voice more tremulous than I'd like to admit. The car paused momentarily before speeding off and turning the corner, disappearing from sight. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. Moments later, the car returned, this time stopping right in front of me. Engine idling, the soft hum piercing the night's silence. Panicking, I turned into a nearby alley, praying that my knowledge of the local streets would help me escape. The car revved menacingly before giving chase. I zigzagged through the maze of alleyways, hoping to lose it, but the car was relentless. The narrow alleys magnified the roar of the engine, creating an echoing symphony of terror. The car seemed to be everywhere, at every turn just a heartbeat away. Desperate to find refuge, I remembered an old abandoned warehouse nearby. I dashed towards it, the car's headlights painting grotesquely elongated shadows ahead of me. Reaching the warehouse, I forced open a side door and slipped inside. The interior was shrouded in darkness, broken only by the occasional stream of moonlight filtering through the cracked windows. I hid behind an old, rusted machine, trying to muffle my labored breathing. Moments later, the car's headlights illuminated the main entrance of the warehouse. The beams swept across the room, creating a dance of shadows and light. The engine went silent. I held my breath, ears straining for any sound. Time seemed to stretch infinitely. Then, the unmistakable sound of a car door creaking open echoed through the vast space, followed by soft, deliberate footsteps. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, disorienting me. Whoever it was, they were in the warehouse with me. I felt trapped, cornered. Mustering every ounce of courage, I decided to make a run for it. As quietly as possible, I moved towards a broken window at the back of the warehouse, intending to climb through. Just as I was about to make my escape, a beam of light shot through the darkness, landing squarely on me. Frozen in its glare, I could see the silhouette of a person holding a flashlight. The figure began to move towards me, the beam never wavering from its focus. Summoning a burst of adrenaline, I lunged through the window, shards of glass grazing my skin. I ran without looking back, the chilling sound of footsteps echoing behind me. By the time I reached the safety of my home, the footsteps had faded, but the terror remained. I locked all doors, shut all windows, and collapsed on my couch, heart pounding. Days turned into weeks. I stopped my nightly jogs, always haunted by the memory of that relentless car and its unseen driver. The fear, the suspense of not knowing their intentions weighed heavily on me. One evening, as I was trying to move past the incident, a package arrived at my doorstep. Inside, I found a brand new pair of jogging shoes and a simple note, "See you soon." The terror was no longer just out there on the streets. It had found its way to my doorstep. Every night, every sound, every passing car held the promise of a nightmare reborn. The sanctuary of my daily life had been shattered, replaced with the chilling suspense of the unknown. The nightly ritual had become so intrinsic to my existence that I scarcely paid it any mind. I'd lace up my running shoes, stretch for a few minutes, and take off into the comforting embrace of the nighttime. The dark streets, peppered with the occasional dim streetlight, provided an ambiance that stilled my racing mind. There were seldom any other joggers, but this particular evening was different. A shadowy figure appeared in the distance. I noticed the subtle bounce in their stride, signaling another jogger. At first, I found it mildly comforting to have a fellow nocturnal runner nearby. But then something struck me as off. The stranger maintained the exact distance behind me, regardless of whether I increased or decreased my speed. They seemed to adjust theirs to match. It was eerily precise. I could hear the soft patter of their footsteps, a rhythm echoing my own, never getting closer or fading away. To test my suspicions, I abruptly halted, bending to tie a shoelace that wasn't undone. Behind me, the patter ceased simultaneously. I tried not to let my rising panic show, keeping my breathing steady. I stole a quick glance over my shoulder. There, in the dim glow of a streetlight, the other jogger stood, mirroring my pose. Even though their shoes were slip-on, my heartbeat thundered in my ears. Trying to shake it off, I resumed my jog, and as predicted, so did they. I decided to change my route, turning down streets I had never ventured through before. Yet, no matter how random or erratic my path, they were always there, their unwavering silhouette imprinted in my peripheral vision. My initial unease grew into terror. Who were they? What did they want? Finally, in a bid to confront my fears, I stopped and turned to face them. I couldn't make out their features, just the vague silhouette of a runner. With as much bravado as I could muster, I yelled, "Why are you following me?" To my horror, their voice, a chilling mimicry of my own, responded, "Why are you following me?" The realization hit me like a sledgehammer. Every move I made mirrored, including my voice. It wasn't them following me, but they were echoing my every move, word for word, step for step. I turned on my heels, putting as much distance as I could between us. I ducked into an alley, pressed myself flat against a cold brick wall, and waited, my heart pounding, to see if they'd follow. Moments felt like hours. The distant echo of footsteps approached, but then continued past the alley, fading into the distance. I waited a bit longer before finally daring to move. Taking the longest, most roundabout way home, I constantly checked over my shoulder, but they were gone. When I finally reached my apartment, I locked the door behind me, drawing all curtains shut. Every sound, every shadow made me jump. It took hours for my heartbeat to return to its regular rhythm. Days turned into weeks, and the terror of that night was etched into my memory. I never went jogging at night again. Every time I'd lace up my shoes, the terror would grip me, and I'd recall the chilling echo of my own voice. The other jogger was never seen again, and no one I spoke to had ever encountered anything similar. Yet, the fear persisted. The streets, once my sanctuary, now held the memory of unexplained terror. The most chilling part was not knowing what the other jogger wanted, or if they'd ever return. Every night, as I lay in bed, I'd listen for. In the deafening silence of the night, I feared I'd once again hear the soft echo of footsteps matching my own. Living in the heart of the city, I cherished the quaint pockets of quietude I found. One such refuge was the narrow lane behind my apartment complex. Dotted with old trees and lined with worn cobblestones, it provided a peaceful route for my evening strolls. One evening, as the first stars began to twinkle and the city lights painted the horizon, I noticed him, a man standing motionless at the far end of the lane. He was dressed in an old-fashioned suit with a fedora shadowing his face. He was the very image of stillness amidst the urban hum. A fleeting thought of approaching him crossed my mind. Maybe he was lost. But as the distance between us shortened, a chilling unease settled in. Every instinct screamed at me to keep my distance. Days turned into weeks, and every evening, like clockwork, he was there, always in the same spot, always unchanging. No matter how the world around him changed, rain, shine, or wind, he remained unaffected. One evening, driven by a mix of curiosity and unease, I decided to change my route, turning into a nearby alley before reaching the spot where he usually stood. As I ambled through the winding path, I couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched. Emerging from the alley, I expected to be free of his presence, but to my horror, he was there, still as ever. Now, positioned at the end of this new path, our eyes met for the first time. His were an abyss, devoid of emotion, but brimming with intent. I couldn't fathom. Disturbed, I began to seek alternative routes, each more circuitous than the last, hoping to avoid him. Yet, he was always there, waiting, watching. The city, once my haven, now felt like a trap with him as its sentinel. Finally, one evening, I mustered enough courage to confront this enigma. I approached him, my steps hesitant. As I drew closer, the world around me seemed to blur. The city's cacophony faded, replaced by an all-encompassing silence. Stopping a few feet away, I managed to croak out, "Who are you? Why are you here?" He didn't respond, his gaze fixed on the horizon. But as the moments stretched, he slowly turned his head toward me. The weight of his gaze was suffocating. Then, in a voice that sounded like the whispering of dried leaves, he spoke. "I stand where I am called." Confused and desperate for answers, I pressed, "Called by whom?" His hollow eyes met mine and he whispered, "By you." A chill ran down my spine. I stumbled back, memories flooding in. The lane, the trees, the old cobblestones, they were all too familiar. They were from my childhood stories. My grandmother used to tell stories of a watcher, a guardian of sorts, who appeared when someone was in dire need of protection. My heart sank as I picked up a photo of my late grandmother from the floor. She had spoken of the motionless man as a protective spirit from our family's lore, summoned unconsciously by those in peril. He stood guard, warding off unseen threats. The realization was overwhelming. The man, the silent observer, had not been a threat, but a protector, a spectral guardian invoked by my subconscious fears. The following evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline, I revisited the lane. He was no longer there, and his duty was fulfilled. The city's sounds filled the air, the earlier silence replaced by a comforting hum. Yet, every evening stroll from then on was accompanied by a silent prayer of gratitude to the motionless man, my family's age-old guardian, who reminded me that sometimes, in the face of inexplicable terror, protection comes from the most unexpected sources.